Welcome to the Independent Thinking Show for Fifth Wrist Radio. This is a place dedicated to showcasing the great people doing interesting things in the world of horology. My name is Roman, and today I'm joined by my co-host and friend of Fifth Wrist, Adam from Medium Watch. Hi Adam, how are you?
Very well. How are you?
I'm very well. It's wonderful to have you along with us again for this episode, and we're very excited. We have a very, very special guest joining us today. Adam, would you like to introduce our very special guest?
Sure. So it's a real delight to introduce Roni Madhvani. He has the Instagram handle Roni_M_29, and he is a collector of all things Art Deco and really a true fan of design. He has a brilliant collection of watches. He also collects pocket watch, hood ornaments, and many other objects of art. My grandfather always told me, buy what you like and you can never lose. And I think he's really someone that follows that philosophy to the T. And so I thought he'd be a great person to have on the podcast. It's one of the best collections of watches I've ever seen. And he's a really interesting guy. And so I'm looking forward to talking to him and hearing what he has to say about how this all came together, because it's truly an amazing collection. And he actually is someone who has already been participating in the Fifth Wrist Project. He wrote a brilliant review of a Cartier crash that's on the website.
Oh, of course. Oh, that's incredible. I'd love to hear more about this piece. Welcome to the show.
Hi there, how are you guys?
We're very well. Thank you for joining us. I think you've been a dream guest for quite a few of us.
Thank you so much for having me. Gosh, you've built up the expectations now.
Oh, I think you'll be a fascinating guest. Don't sell yourself short. As I was saying before, if we had to draw up a list of dream guests or people who are thoughtful and interesting and whose collections span a real fascinating period in history, you would certainly feature on many lists. So it's great to have you with us.
Thank you again for joining us.
Gosh, thank you. Thank you. You're very kind, and I'm most humbled. Thank you very much.
Well, look, before we dive into our conversation, and I'm sure it'll be a good one, shall we do some wrist checks and drink checks, which is sort of a classic bit of Fifth Wrist shtick, as we say here. Adam, why don't you tell us what you're wearing on your wrist and what you're drinking, if you're drinking anything?
So, in Ronnie's honor, I went for my Patek Philippe Golden Ellipse because it is a time only watch from the 60s. And I'm drinking iced coffee. It's early in the morning here.
Wonderful. What about you, Ronnie?
I've got a 70s sort of cushion-shaped Breguet time-only watch, which is, I guess, what's called a dress watch, but I don't believe in that because I just wear watches whenever and whatever. And I'm having a boring glass of water because I've had my dose of caffeine this morning. It's where I am. It's lunchtime.
Lovely. Oh, I'd love to. I think I've seen that Breguet on your Instagram account. It's a wonderful piece. And for myself, I have my classic gin and tonic, which is whenever I have that, I always always gets me in the zone for a podcast. And what I've got at the moment is I've got a Gerald Genta retro piece, which is a 38 millimeter stainless steel single hand, jumping hour retrograde minute, sort of classic Genta design. I think from 1998, and I think it was the same year that Genta sold the company to the Hourglass Group, I believe. Yeah, knowing we're going to have Ronnie on the show, I had to sort of look through the box and find something with a strong sense of design. So Gerald Genta is really the one really really appealed to me. I'm not sure, Ronnie, does Gerald Genta sort of feature in your collection at all, or is it not really your time period?
I think what the great thing about Gentry is, I mean, he's known for the two classics, the Royal Oak and the Nautilus, but he did far much more. And in fact, one of the persons I'm going to recommend in terms of following on Instagram, he's done a lovely article he's written on the influence of Genta at Audemars Piguet. And actually, Genta worked in his early days selling designs to Audemars at 15 Swiss francs a design. So I think he must have done a few hundred designs for Audemars, for early time only watches from the 50s and 60s. So I think he's there in your face probably more than we sort of think of him. And when you look at the watch, I think you can sometimes tell this is a Genta design. Yeah, so absolutely. I think he is the sort of one of the sort of kingpins of design in the heyday of watch designing, which for me is the sort of 1950s and 60s.
Did you zero in on that time period fairly early on in your sort of collecting journey? or is it something that you sort of discovered as you went along? You sort of settled into that.
Um, well, I think sort of where what I collect is, based on design, and that's sort of the primary thing that underpins my collection. And then if you look at design, when were the great designs produced? It coincidentally happened to be that period from the end of the war till the sort of mid 60s, late 60s. And we'll talk about the sort of distinct sort of time periods in terms of design and the evolution of design in terms of watchmaking, and that for me is the belle epoque of watchmaking design, I think.
Could you walk us through the periods? I'd be curious to learn more.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of advent of the wristwatch was the sort of First World War, the end of the First World War, when there was a practical need. Pocket watches were not practical, and one soldiers in the trenches needed something sort of on the wrist and easy to see the time and stuff, and it evolved through that. Then sort of the interwar period saw depression, and in terms of design, that reflected very strongly in terms of very austere case design. You saw, for example, jump hours, and you look at the designs. They weren't fancy, and of course during the wartime, I think the industry basically went into a snooze mode. And then at the end of the war, there was this sort of sudden big shift in where the creative sort of juices started to flow, and I think everything went sort of crazy almost and stuff, and watch brands went along with it. Unlike for example now, where probably there's fear to sort of experiment and push the envelope and push the boundaries in terms of design, and that continued until this sort of, and there were distinct phases. There was Art Deco initially, probably from 1945 till the sort of mid 50s, and then what they call modern, which was art sort of it sort of evolved, and then you went into the 70s, which is not particularly what I like, and then from there on to where we are now, really. Those are the phases, as I see them in my little. Uh,
Oh, thank you. So many choices. How do you pick what you want? What's your philosophy for collecting sculptures and other art, as well as watches?
as you mentioned in the beginning, I think if you like something, go for it. I mean, people collect watches from in terms of brands or in terms of complications. For me, it's the design, sort of probably 90-95%, and then probably look under the bonnet thereafter. But the design is the key driver, and I think, and that's what I think what holds it together for me, and stuff. And you do get it's sort of bizarre and eccentric to some people. It's not your normal and stuff, but for me, there's not that underlying theme brings it all
Hmm.
together, and that's my passion and what I enjoy.
Have you always been a collector of objects and things, and then you've sort of migrated into watches, or did you sort of discover watches fairly early on and then really discover that they speak to you in a way that other things might not?
I think I sort of, well, it's from an early age. I sort of had a fascination for watches. I think it was at university, sort of walking to university and going past watch shops in London, actually, where I developed an interest. Obviously, couldn't afford anything at that time, and I think it sort of grew from that. And then I think in the late sort of about 1980, someone gave me a watch catalog, an auction catalog for actually Friedman Habsburg, which was the precursor to Antiquorum. And I think that sort of, when I looked in that, it had some lovely watches in there of the genre I collect, and I think that sort of sowed the seeds. I think. In my mind. In terms of the question for the pocket watches, well, I started off collecting pocket watches with enamel portraits of Indian Maharajas, and these were basically almost photographic like renditions painted from about 1880 till about 1940. And the Indian Maharajas were, extremely, not all of them, but a lot of them were extremely wealthy, and they were sort of big purveyors of luxury goods in the houses of Cartier, Van Cleef, etc. And these watches were done in Switzerland primarily. They're hand painted, and they were in workmanship. They were absolutely amazing. Over the years, I mean, I collected quite a few, and then over the years, they went from being affordable, and now it's just become crazy. And I actually unfortunately sold some of mine and stuff. But my problem with pocket watches is they just sit on a desk. I don't
Hmm.
at least use them and wear them. I'm not happy to spend vast amounts of money. I mean, I do love. I've got a few, again, Art Deco pocket watches like the Breguet Wandering Hours. I've got a clock of it,
Oh, that's
and
wonderful.
and, and a pocket watch, and I've just recently bought one of these, another sort of. very Art Deco one, which I'll share with once I've got hold of it and stuff. Yeah. So, but the practicality of pocket watches, I think, is the issue for me, and versus spending,
Hmm.
vast amounts of money for something you're not really going to use. Because in watch collecting, I just feel that unless you're going to wear the watch, if it's just going to sit in the safe, it's rather pointless. I do wear all my watches and change them as much as I can. That's important for me as well.
That makes a lot of sense. I've never worn my Waltham pocket watch, but I always wear my watches. And some of the watches in your collection are engraved with the names of other collectors. These objects live on for decades and pass through numerous hands, and some of them eventually found their way into your hands. Um, have you ever engraved your name on any of your watches?
I haven't got to that stage of vanity yet, but no, I haven't. I think every watch sort of has an history, and when it's got an engraving, it's fascinating. And if it's someone sort of known, and in this day and age, it's quite actually remarkable to, you Google and you get to know. And I've actually got someone who helps me. He's actually one of the people I'm going to recommend on Instagram. I think he's a sort of research expert, Google expert. And for example, I bought a Cartier recently, a very early Cartier from
Oh
1925,
wow.
and it was owned by an American soldier, and it was gifted to him by someone. And I got hold of this chap, and his name's Charlie, and he found the whole research. The guy fought for the Americans came late into the First War, I think in 1916, 1917, and he was in France. I suspect he sort of that French connection got him acquainted with Cartier, and he was gifted this Cartier watch by his father-in-law. And there's sort of a whole sort of you find one finds on the internet his whole history, a picture of him, and it just brought to life a
Oh
watch to
wow.
me. So stories like that, where the engravings are, it's wonderful. I think. I know some people like it, they don't like it. I recently saw another a Vacheron, which was owned by the Archbishop of Boston, and the engraving. I mean, the watch itself, the dial and stuff. I mean, it is of the genre I like in terms of the case and stuff, but the engraving on the back is just so beautiful with sort of motifs from the church and in Latin and stuff. But I haven't bought it yet, or thinking about it. But it's again, it speaks, it oozes of history to me, and I think that's for me that's a fascination.
Hmm. And then with the pocket watches and the Maharajas, is the person on the pocket watch the key element, or is it the design, or some mixture of the two?
No, it really is just that enamel portrait. I don't really care about the movement, but it's like having a piece of art, I guess, on your wall.
Yes.
And I mean, I've got one which was engraved and given by the Maharaja to this Russian gentleman. And I've tried to find out who he was and stuff. He was and stuff. But for example, and also where these watches turn up. I mean, I bought that in New Orleans. I don't know, 20 years ago. And why would a Maharaja watch be in New Orleans? I found one in Australia. It's quite bizarre. Where they come. You don't, none in India, by the way.
Interesting.
It's,
But what you say is quite right. It's having the engraving or having the exquisite enamel portraits and things really does ground these sort of objects in history in human lifetime, which I think is really fascinating. So I agree with you. That is part of the attraction for me as well, is knowing that this particular piece belonged to this particular person at this particular moment in time really sort of speaks to me as well in that same way. That's fascinating.
and I think with the access of the internet and stuff, to be able to find out who that person is. I mean, 10 years ago, you wouldn't know. It would just be a
Mm.
name on a watch, unless it was a celebrity or something. So that's added value, I think.
Yeah, I recently shared with Roman that I had purchased this watch that had a gentleman's name on the dial. And it was an ordinary gentleman that died in 2015, but we were able to figure out who he was, where he lived, what he'd done. And it was just a regular person because all that information is now public.
Yeah.
It's kind of incredible. Yeah, so these things live on. They tell stories, and they in a way connect people across distances, even though we wouldn't expect it. Uh,
Sure.
but one way you may have, I guess, made your own mark is I believe you designed your own Cartier tank.
This was pre Richemont, before Richemont took over Cartier. Yeah, so they did one, and they've again sort of gone into that. But basically, soon after that, when Richemont, they priced them so expensive if you wanted to do a custom watch.
Hmm.
to discourage people. I'm sure people did, and you don't get to know who did what. But although now I think it's like, Paddy Flip. They tell you, oh, we're giving you a unique piece, and suddenly you go on Instagram, you see five others, so it's not really unique. But
Interesting.
you may think it is.
Yours is unique, just like everyone else's. That's right.
Absolutely. And as long as you feel it, just that's what matters.
That's right. That's right.
Bit of a mug's game. And especially having run through loopholes to see if you're good enough to spend your hard-earned money. But
Yes, that's right.
no, but they've started again, and I mean, that personalization, I think, adds a connection to a watch, and obviously it's great to sort of it's good sort of bragging thing as well. To say you designed it and stuff, but it's cool. I think at the end of the day, I'm also working on a watch now with some people in Switzerland. They unfortunately I can't reveal who it is and stuff. I'm actually designing an entire watch. It's based on the Wandering Hour sort of clock I have, the pocket watch and the clock, but in the form of a wristwatch. Breguet did make a few
Yes.
in very early in the 20s and 30s. But these are things that come up, and they're totally for me they're unaffordable. But so this project I'm working on, I hope to have the watch by December in the form of a wristwatch. So let's see how it goes.
Oh, wow. And have you thought at all about the case designs? I know you're so passionate about the shape of the lugs and the shape of the case and just the whole.
No, absolutely. So for this particular watch I'm talking about, what I've done is gone with the sort of style of a Patek 2552, which is the sort of Disco
Mm.
Volante, as the Italians call
Mm.
it, the flying saucer case, which has the step case. It's a very classic and in my mind a lovely case, 36 millimeter, which is a great size,
Yeah.
and stuff. So let's see how it goes.
Oh, that's it's really fantastic.
Absolutely. And when you were approaching, designing your watch, did you have a preconceived idea of exactly, do you have a formed notion of this is what it's going to look like and you just need somebody to bring that to life? Or is it more of a consultative process with you and the maker?
No, I had it. I'm sort of pretty focused in most things, and I think people find me difficult to work with. I mean, you've on the things you like to talk about. You talked of hotels and stuff, but when it comes to design and stuff, I do listen to people. I don't bulldoze everyone, but I keep I'm willing to listen. But my way or the highway, especially if I'm spending my hard-earned money, I don't want to be told how to
Sure.
spend it. No, it's as simple as
Mm.
that.
No, no, fair enough. So did you find that designing your watch with Cartier, a little while ago before pre-Richemont, did you walk in with a design and said, lay it down flat, thump the table and say, make it ready by Monday, or did you have to have more of a diplomatic, softer approach?
No, no, no. There's too much groveling involved with all that, so you can't do that. It's well, I mean, I look. I mean, and understandably, what these brands are looking at is that it has resonance with their past and the brand integrity and stuff. And I understand that. There's no point coming out with some whack job design. It's just wasting everyone's time. They'll just say no, and this process takes a year, 2 years, or whatever back and forward. So you're just
Mm.
wasting more time. So it's important that the DNA of what you're thinking of fits in with the brand integrity, and especially the ones I'm working on now. It so it's you've got to in that case I came up with something which was acceptable, and in fact I'm working with a few designs right now. And the first round they've said it's okay, and it's otherwise it'll they say no, we're not going to do it. It's not within the sort of
Hmm.
philosophy of the brand and stuff. So I think it's important to understand where they're coming from as well when you're doing something
Oh,
like that.
absolutely. And I mean that dial that you've designed for Cartier, and I urge all our listeners to go through your Instagram and find it. I mean, it's a Cintre case. I mean, it looks like a design that came out organically from Cartier, which is as high a compliment as I can give to you and your knowledge of what a Cartier design should be.
Exactly.
I think that's important. And in fact, look, I've contacted some of the other brands to see if they'll do something based on their past, and they're reluctant really to. First of all, most brands want to do complications, and that's where they make their money. So no one's interested in doing a dial only or a case
Hmm.
only because it's not worth their time, the cost and stuff, which is sad, I think. But their sort of thing is, well, we can't copy the exact what we did in the past. It has to be a modern. This is the wording that they use. It has to be a modern interpretation of the past. Now, I don't understand that because I think if you had a successful design in the past, then and it's sort of in demand by people who pay their hard-earned money and keep you in business, well, what's wrong with doing it again?
That makes sense.
I don't understand that, but again, but I do understand the other side. For example, with Patek, until a certain not so long ago, to have Breguet numbers on a modern Patek Philippe watch was a special request, and suddenly overnight, everything that came out was Breguet numbers. Now, if I've waited 5 years and run through hoops to get my special watch, and now not every watch, I'm kind of pissed off. That what are they doing?
Yeah, rightfully so, I think. Absolutely.
So I don't know. It's a difficult one, I guess. I mean, they all want to grow and they all want to sell numbers and make lots of money. So, individual collectors, it's not really. I don't think in their sort of scope of things it really matters that much.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there are a few brands that have a piece unique business model, and that's all they do. But for most of these brands, they're trying to sell something that's somewhat standardized. And so, sculpture is so important to you. Have you ever actually sculpted a sculpture that's not a watch case?
No, they're only at school and they said I was useless at art, so don't do it.
Goodness me. Oh, I think they said the same to Brancusi and Rodin, so don't feel discouraged. Thankfully, they didn't.
Well, I don't know, I remember in my school, so I went to one of these posh English public schools, and they even said, you'll never get into university. And so I managed to get into a good one. So there you go.
Yeah. So what do they know? That's well, it's never too late to pick up a chisel.
No, absolutely.
But it is really interesting because I find that there is certainly people who appreciate art but are not necessarily artistic in the sense of making art. But they have a good eye and they have a sensitivity.
I mean, the admirers of art are, I think, and collectors of art, very few sort of unnecessarily sculptures or artists or anything. I mean, I think having deep pockets helps, but not, otherwise, not really. I agree with you.
But I think knowledge and taste and sort of understanding of history and art movements and sort of the what the artists are trying to achieve or trying to say, I think also helps because deep pockets on their own.
Yeah,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and it's your exposure and your knowledge ultimately determines what your tastes are, I think, isn't it?
I guess my own trajectory, I started out painting Bauhaus paintings after observing them in university. And so when I didn't have any money, I would just make it myself. And then eventually I started buying as well as making. But it's harder to do, I guess, in some domains than others. And the environment shapes you so much. Just seeing those things in the walls. In the dormitory, turns out, I had Joseph Albert's works, and I didn't realize it at the time that this was in the dorm. But lo and behold, I looked back at my old photos, and there he is. There's Albert's.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing.
So yeah, the environment really does impact, how you feel about art, how you feel about design. You actually build environments. So you have this company, Marasa, that has safari lodges and hotels in Africa and India, and people go there and they experience some an environment, service. Has your interest in the design of watches and sculptures influenced the design of your hotels and the environments you're creating?
It's not so much sort of in terms of watches, but so basically we have this is my ours is a sort of family business, third generation family business, started in Uganda, and my grandfather went over 100 years ago with nothing and got into various things, and so the safari lodges are there, and then we decided, I don't know, about 10 years ago, that we should sort of look elsewhere in terms of business, and I had the idea of putting up hotels based on religious tourism in India because I saw an opportunity there. And Indians tend to pray good times, bad
Hmm.
times, they're always praying. Uh, so there's a big opportunity. And most of these, there's temples everywhere in India, by the way. You go around the corner, you'll find one. But the main sort of serious sort of temples in terms of visitor numbers are in secondary and tertiary towns and cities where they weren't at that time good hotels,
Right.
which offered cleanliness, hygiene, and value for money. You don't, when you're going on a religious thing, you don't want to spend tons of money. So they were five-star hotels,
Sure.
but you may not necessarily want to pay $500. $300 and stuff. So,
Mm.
and to differentiate, what I've done is that is taken in at each of the locations is taken in terms of the philosophy, the design, every and the locality, the sort of everything, the architecture in that of the temple in that particular town, and built around it, and built properties that are laterally spread out rather than sort of going vertically up like a matchbox, which is normally the style in India. But it's been a tough journey. I mean, when I had the idea, I thought, oh, within 3 years I'll have six properties or whatever and stuff. But doing business in India is an absolute nightmare. I mean, I come from Africa and things are difficult, but that's, it's tough doing business. But going back to the design element, so for example, in that property, we've taken in, so it's got the big temple in the town, which is, I don't know from which century, I've forgotten
The
off my head,
Mahabodhi Temple,
off the
right?
top of my
Or
head exactly. Yeah, the Mahabodhi temple. So we've taken in sort of elements from, from design and from Buddhism. The whole design of the property is based on the philosophy of Buddhism and stuff. And then I've got another one in the South
hmm
India, in Tirupati, which has 30 million visitors a year. And again, taken in the inspiration from the temple there and stuff, and sort of playing my way.
I mean, it's fascinating to me. I mean, it's a different culture to my own, but I think there is something noble in a sense of you approaching designing these things with respect to the culture and the architecture and the history of the place that you're putting structures in. Because so often, you sort of get these multinational Hiltons or whatever just plonking down a rectangle in the middle of everywhere that's
Yeah.
interchangeable from in every capital city.
I mean, it's there, but there's also a business sort of rationale for that. I mean, for me, it's important to do. And now, for example, in all the towns where I have built, I mean, there's every man and his dog is built, and they're all branded
Mm.
with your Hiltons and, I don't know, Lemon Tree or whatever the brands are, and they're all what I call
Mm.
matchboxes. But when I built it, I remember even within my own family, and in terms of funding, I said, well, why would you waste money on doing these vast water bodies and stuff,
Mm.
But that's really the differentiator. And for example, when someone walks, this whole selfie thing is incredible, and it just people walking, taking pictures from the minute they walk in, and because and that's really the best sort of advertising, and that's spreading a word of mouth, and of course the deliverables of proper accommodation and service and stuff
Mm.
like that. But it's really that it's key. I mean, it's not just to do the property, to take in the design, the actor, but it was a point of differentiation in terms of the business
Mm.
model.
Makes a lot of sense. And these places are so architectural. So I've gone to Bodh Gaya and Rishikesh, and there's all these temples.
Well, next time you go, you got to stay at my place and tell me about it.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I hope I can go back to India again next year, and we shall see.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll stay in touch. Yeah, absolutely.
but what I love about Bodh Gaya is that there's all these different temples that are built in the styles of the Buddhists from different countries. So it's almost like
Around, besides the main temple, besides that there's so many Buddhist monuments which sort of located in villages and stuff like that, which a lot of people don't know about and probably don't even go to. But India has so much to offer. I mean, it has so much to offer.
Is there any are there any buildings that particularly appeal to you in Bodh Gaya that you saw them and you said, "Wow, that's an interesting structure. That's good design."
Yeah, but I think in India, sadly, the historic preservation isn't the name of the. I mean, it's growing in cities like Mumbai and stuff. There's a consciousness to maintain things as they were and remove the sort of ugly add-ons that have been put on in the last, I don't know, three,
Mm,
4 decades. But and the temple in the temple itself, the Mabodhi temple, I think that's very beautiful.
I do agree. Yeah, and like in Mumbai, are there any things that appeal to you in particular? 'Cause there's such great architecture.
Yeah, I mean, it's so, and again, it's the history of the city. It has all styles. It has, my sort of Art Deco along Marine Drive and stuff, the buildings and stuff. If you go within those buildings to see the
Mm,
foyers
mm,
and stuff. But and then you go to the Victorian sort of architecture and stuff, and the sort of Gothic revival. It's a very beautiful city that has, But I think all cities, if you open your eyes, they have so much to offer. And I think in many cases, a lot of us live in wonderful places, but we don't actually even go and see
mm.
what there is to offer within our own place. But we travel elsewhere to go and see it. But Yeah, it's there for it's. I think it's everywhere, really.
No, that's very true. I actually, Ronnie, I was going to ask you about Art Deco because it does seem to be a style that particularly appeals to you or attracts you both in watches and art and wood ornaments and glass sculptures and things like that. What do you think it is about, particularly about the Art Deco that appeals to you?
I think probably the sort of clean lines and the fact it's a fusion of many cultures. I mean, initially Art Deco took in its origins a lot of design from Africa, from Asia. The big exhibition in 1925 in Paris, which was probably where it sort of put
Mm,
the term Art Deco and stuff. And there was another one in 1931. It sort of it was a coming together of cultures and arts and everything from all over the world. And I think that sort of being manifested in a particular style is what probably the appeal is, I think.
mm. Correct me if I'm wrong. Now, was Art Deco one of the first sort of truly global art movements that really united the world in the approach?
No, I don't think so. I think you had Art Nouveau from the 1890s, 1880s and stuff. So. But I think throughout history, there have always been particular styles and trends people have sort of followed over for that it was relevant to that particular time in history, and maybe it didn't have a name, as these two did,
Mm.
but I think it's always been there. Whatever time we humans live in, they tend to follow certain styles and stuff.
Yes.
Mm. And do you think that will continue to happen, or do you think we're kind of getting towards sort of more of a homogenization or sort of blandness of art design as we're all kind of consuming the same media and whether it's Instagram, social media, whatever? Do you think we're going to see more and more unique movements coming through, or is it more kind of dilution in a sense?
Well, I think art is something that sort of evolves over time and stuff. And again, it's what people's exposure is. And I think the big game changer now is the sort of advent of social media and the access to it, that people have, access to see so much more and attain so much more knowledge should they wish to do. I mean, yes, it's not about validation. I mean, a lot of, social medias, oh, you want number of likes bullshit and number of followers and whatever. But beyond that, you have access to seeing more stuff.
Hmm.
If you go back to watches, I mean, you can't bullshit the collectors anymore because they know they'll tell you more than you go into what do you call it, a boutique of a brand. I think most collectors know more than what they know about their own watches. So the social media's sort of empowered people with knowledge, and that will have its effect in terms of art or anything. And when you have more knowledge, you're willing to experiment. Artists will see, well, at the back of their mind, they'll see, well, this was this, and what's my interpretation of that, and it certainly influence people. So art is, I think, constantly evolving, and it's there to change and evolve.
I agree. Part of me wonders if 2020 will mark a new era in art as we increasingly work from home, have more, I guess, germophobic lifestyles, and live a bit differently, just like the various wars kind of marked endpoints. It's too early for me to yet know exactly what the new style means and what it is, because I think we're getting there. But here in the US, I admit I buy a lot of stuff from Brooks Brothers and J. Crew, both of which have now gone bankrupt and are
Oh, is that so?
and so we're reconstituting ourselves. Those companies, I guess, are reconstituting themselves, and we shall see what this all means for ourselves in this new era.
Sure. I mean, I think I read somewhere that even the fashion industry, which was based on having these fashion shows and runway shows in Paris and Milan or London or whatever, New York, and they were doing it twice a year, and now suddenly there's talk of it's going to be once a year, and probably now not a lot, not at all,
Mm.
and stuff, and that's not the way of doing it anymore. So I think some of these changes are kind of welcome, but I feel sad, and there's a whole genre of people who make their living supporting this and doing this. It's sad to see what are they going to do. I mean, we face it in my business. In that, we were talking, the hotels in India have taken the painful decision of laying off every, except for a skeleton staff, of laying off everyone because I don't know how far. When is it all going to end? If one had, if one knew it's 3 months, 6 months, you'll still hang in there and keep everyone.
Mm.
But when it's so, you don't know. It's like flying a small aircraft in clouds without a radar. You don't know where you're heading, really.
Yes, no, that is very, very true. It's interesting. I'm just reflecting back on what you were saying before about the rise of social media being a net positive thing for enriching collectors' knowledge. Part of me agrees with you because it's certainly easier to find information about or find your community about specific things. But I also my big worry is that everybody's chasing the same 4 or 5 models, like whether it's a Nautilus here or a Patek Philippe something or a Daytona or something, just simply because those are the things that kind of saturate the visual space. And that's my worry in a sense, is that instead of, we're sort of squandering almost the potential of that enrichment of knowledge by everybody just the knowledge being very shallow and sort of, pictorially driven without a lot of content. I don't know, maybe that could be a private concern. Maybe I'm just pessimistic while I'm stuck at home.
No, you're absolutely right. And but also I think it's underpinned by greed, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
That, if you do get it, you're going to double your money, triple your money. I mean, that's what ultimately also drives that whole sort of frenzy of herds and sheep to sort of follow these three desirable watches, I think, as well. And I don't mean to offend the people who wear them either. So.
Oh, we've offended them plenty before this episode. Don't worry about it.
That said, while it may be driving some homogenization, perhaps there are some areas of differentiation. So you've lived in Uganda and India and England and perhaps other places as well. Have you seen differences in the collecting cultures? And are you seeing convergence or divergence over time in terms of what people find appealing?
I think you'll find niches of people who sort of, well, yeah, absolutely. But mainstream is mainstream. And I mean, if you look at the watch industry itself, I mean, they're geared up to do numbers. You mentioned that earlier. So ultimately, it's a business, and you're fed, vast amounts of money go into marketing, and that's what's you fed into you, and it almost builds this sort of hype around it. A lot of the sort of advertising, I don't. What I think was the past way of advertising. For example, celebrities. Who gives a shit what some celebrities wearing? I mean, that's not going to influence me to get a watch and stuff. But I don't understand. But they're still sort of banging away at that. I think times have changed, and
Yeah.
the ad agencies that represent the watch brands, well, they need to rethink as well. Some of the ways of doing things.
Agreed. Sometimes I find that the advertisements are actually, I guess, generators of, I guess, negative intangible value for me. In that the ad is off-putting, and I like to watch more before I saw the ad, depending on the messaging. But
Absolutely.
But Ronnie, is your collection, if I could ask, is your collection own exclusively sort of vintage, or do you look at modern pieces these days at all as something worthy of adding to your collection?
This is where I'm coming from. So, I mean, if you look in specifics, I've got some Patek Philippe's that are what are termed as modern. For those who know, like the
Hmm.
3970, a 5140, and 5004. And it's, for me, there's a distinct sort of era of that company. And they're within that era, and now they've moved on to
Mm.
another era. It's probably with the change of direction and stuff. So it's there, but ultimately, it's all based on sort of tastes and preferences. I mean, I think there's a lot of beautiful watches being made by independent watchmakers and stuff. Have I owned any? No, I haven't. Would I like to? I mean, if I was, there's no
Oh,
end
yes.
to spending money. I think really, but there has to be focus. I mean, that's for me is the biggest challenge. You get tempted every day and stuff, but a lot of these independent watches are, I think, expensive by any standard. And I know traditionally you don't talk of prices or values and stuff, but if you're putting in a lot of your savings into something, I don't want to find as soon as I bought it, it's worth half the amount,
Mhm.
Sure.
and that's the reality of it. I can't afford it. I just can't afford it, and I work hard for my money, so that's why I've not sort of really bought these things. And one watches auctions and you see what they go for new and then what they're going for, in the secondary market. So that's kind of off-putting. I think it'll grow as more and more people come into the watch frenzy, feeding frenzy. I think there'll obviously be more people producing watches, more independent sort of watchmakers and stuff, which is all good stuff. But for me, it's sort of I'm on the sidelines watching, really.
That makes sense. And all too often, people ask you what your watches cost, and it always really bothers you and drives you nuts.
But it doesn't. I mean, I just feel that even with social media, there has to be some basic etiquette and manners.
Absolutely.
I don't have any issue. If someone asks me, please, can you tell me, what does your or please, well, would you is this part of your collection
Hmm.
or is it, are you looking to sell it? It's just how you phrase it. Now, if I don't know you, even on social media, and you just say how much, that pisses me off because I just find that when I'm not a bloody shopkeeper, and you can look and tell from a page. I'm not hawking and peddling watches. So if you just ask me saying, "Please, can you tell me?" or "Would you know?" I mean, I ask people sometimes, but in a polite way. There's nothing wrong with it. That it's not. I've not got out of bed the wrong side every morning that I'm pissed off that everyone asks me how much, but. It's just how you do it. And then when you do say there's no thank you, there's nothing, they just piss off. That's annoying, I think. And for me, I'm good. If you're dealing with me, and I reply to all my messages and everything, and spend a lot of time on this thing. But I just feel that there must be some basic etiquette. And for me, I'm drawing the line, and I'm not accepting crap from anyone. That's just how it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, I agree. It's sometimes a bit inappropriate.
Sorry, and sometimes people say, "Oh, it's not their culture." It is. In every culture, there is a basic etiquette of manners. Whether you're from the Middle East, or you're from the Far East, or wherever you come from, Africa, whatever, there's please and thank you. That's all. That's all I'm asking for.
Oh, absolutely. I think, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think the whole point of etiquette is that good manners from all cultures mesh together. There has to be a platform of reasonable, polite, respectful exchange. I completely agree with you, without a doubt.
And some of us, you have to draw the line somewhere. That's for me, I feel I'm drawing the line. That's it.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I wonder is the value of the watch even knowable? Because let's say you bought the watch 20 years ago and only maybe a dozen were made in that particular shape and they're all in different conditions. Without auctioning off the watch and actually discovering the price through an auction, do you even know what the watch is worth? Because these are not commodity watches.
No, I agree with you, but I think I don't know what the sort of benchmark is. I mean, it's always linked to something similar, and I think everyone's got. I mean, the whole frenzy around these Daytonas. There was one I think sold a couple 10 days ago, or something that went for in Hong Kong for something. I don't know what. And everyone was in sort of awe of what it went for and everything. But so I think there is a awareness of what pricing is. Everyone's watching what the pricing is, including myself. Or if there's a vintage watch and
Hmm.
it comes out and I have the same one, of course I want to know what it's worth and stuff. So I'm not saying that I'm sort of oblivious to it and I don't want to know. It's rude to find out stuff, but I think there's a way. But obviously, if it's a one-off piece and stuff, I mean, if you went to an auctioneer, he'll probably give you three times as much what it's worth in order to get that watch, to consign that watch with them. And whether it will sell for that, I don't know. I mean, it depends on the day. I mean, I've learned that, you can give it auction, and if there's two people after it, good luck.
Yeah.
You're off to Vegas. But if it's not, then you're just gonna what it's worth, really. But at the end of the day, the value of a watch is based on demand and supply, isn't that?
Can I ask, Ronnie, with your collection, I'm often fascinated by collectors because there are people who aggregate pieces and things never leave, and there are others who are meticulous about having a number, whether it's 5, 10, 50, 100, and they get to a level and it has to be one in, one out or something. What's your kind of collecting philosophy? Do you rotate the pieces out, or pretty much once it's in your hands, it sort of tends to stay put forever?
I wish it could be that. It's just, I mean, it's what I can. I mean, ultimately, the pot is not never ending. So a lot of times I've got to get rid of stuff, and in fact I put a post up I think last night of all my things I regret selling, and
Ah.
it really makes me sad and cry. I've had to sell them, but I think we all go through unless you're very wealthy and stuff. That's different, but. It's you've got to make decisions and cull. I mean, as a collector, if I saw something in better condition, yes, I'll get rid of the one that's not so good and exchange it for that. If I saw sort of I don't know, rose gold over yellow gold, is rock paper scissors in
Sure,
the collecting pot,
sure.
isn't it?
I guess that makes sense.
No, we'd love to. I'd love to keep all and be greedy and stuff, but I wish I don't have the means.
I sometimes think having limitations is actually a good thing, but because it does force you to evaluate pieces as they come in and come out. Otherwise, it's just, if you're endlessly accumulating, you can sort of do it mindlessly in a way. If that you're not accountable.
Also becomes sort of meaningless. I mean, I have friends who are very wealthy, and I'm sure they could go out and buy whatever they wanted. And I always think, I always sort of, want to sort of, I wish I was had the same as them. But in reality, no, I don't know. When it came to what in the realm of watches, I don't know, because if you could do that, then what's left in life? I mean, I wake up, on my one of the reasons I spend all that time on this Instagram is to get private messages saying I've got this for sale.
Absolutely. You cast a net. Absolutely.
Someone's offering something that I'm looking for and stuff like that. And those things to look for. If you had all the money in the world, you'd just go out and buy it.
The hidden market. And many of these watches are watches that were made under the Ibach system, where there were common vendors that were supplying dials and hands, and in some cases bracelets. And the different companies were all buying from each other in these vendors and putting watches together. And there's been this real migration towards in-house. Do you think this has been for the better, for the worse, and has it changed design to have more in-house production and less decentralization?
I think it's a movement and trend in business in general to sort of vertically integrate and own, your whole supply chain and, you know, take direct ownership of everything. In terms of what's better or worse, I mean, obviously the old way is preferable because individuals did things at what they were good at with passionately and did put in their best. Now it's part of one big thing. I mean, in my own business, you look at owning someone who supplies you this or whatever and stuff and integrating and stuff. And is it the best? I mean, it's always, at the end of the day, it's about costs, reducing costs, increasing
Hmm.
efficiency, and it's a business, whereas that old way was not efficient. It's a shame. I think one of the turning to the implications of that in terms of watch design and stuff. I think when you're part of a big conglomerate and stuff, people don't want to take the risk. I mean, for a big brand to venture and launch a new watch with exciting case and stuff, the risk of failure is so great that the fear of it, I mean, just the cost and the negativity associated. You look at one of the brands that launched a model recently, and the backlash against it, and it's tremendous. And to be labeled to have a failure in your stable and stuff, no one wants that. The old way is preferable, but the new way is the way of our world, I think, really.
Does the new way lead to less or more groupthink? Because if all the major brands are buying cases from a small number of vendors and they're buying from the same vendors, then you might actually have more consistency across brands. I think there are two watches in your collection, I'm blocking which two, that have essentially like different grades of the same case, where there's like the high grade on one and the lower grade on the other.
The case maker was Markovsky from the 60s and stuff. So I mean, yeah, that reflects also in the price and stuff between Patek Philippe using a case and the ultimate finishing they give to that case, and the other an independent sort of smaller watch brand and stuff. So I mean, but do you want consistency across in sort of all brands in terms of them all making the same thing? I mean, that story I said in the beginning of Genta selling his designs for 15 Swiss francs to Audemars Piguet. I mean, that's wonderful. So you basically go along with the sketch and probably show and say, well, here, do you want this one? And go with the whole, sketchbook of 50 design. They'll say yes, yes, no, 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 yes, yes. So you've got lovely one-off or a few pieces of each. I mean, that's beautiful, I think.
Interesting. But I guess the other hand is that I have agentas that are from different brands. I've got an engineer from IWC. I've got a Royal Oak. I've got one of his house brand watches, a by Retro, and his design language got embedded in so many different brands. Does it create a monoculture or?
Well, I don't think one notices. I mean, I didn't notice the AP sort of connection till it was flagged, and now I can, you get an inkling that yes, this is a Gento thing. So again, it's to do with awareness and knowledge and being able to develop a sense of feeling and stuff. But I mean, yes, there may be similarities between a Royal Oak and Nautilus, because I think that they're sort of in your face every day. But between something he did for IWC and stuff, I mean, unless you know, like you're telling us now, you wouldn't probably know that it was a Genta case.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, my main, I guess, worry is that I'm not sure who the next or who the current Genta like design person is. I mean, I'm just sitting here struggling to name a truly modern iteration of a case. I mean, if we take something unique like an MB&F Urwerk or one of those really modern out there designers, I can't think of a truly modern designer working for the big maisons now that is really pushing the envelope. Sort of a bit frightening in a sense.
But those very maisons wouldn't want you to know who it is anyway, who designed anything. I mean, they don't want the back end people to be recognized. I have a friend who's a designer, worked for a big brand, and just the feedback she got was that they're just so stifling.
Hmm,
Right.
They wouldn't allow anything, any expression of creativity. So but who that face is, I don't think they'd really come up and tell you who did this and stuff. It's the brand, or the top end of the company will take, the CEO will take the credit. I was the one behind it and stuff. Forget the people who slogged and
Yeah. Hmm.
put the movement together and stuff. It's all about massaging egos as well,
hmm.
I think.
Have there been different eras that you've seen? I guess you mentioned in Pedek, but in the other brands, have there been different eras as management has changed, where there's been this feeling of a discontinuity in terms of the design language?
I think in every business, someone new comes to the top. They want to leave their mark, and this is the sad part in any business, not just watchmaking. And sometimes they come there and try and reinvent the wheel in this quest to leave their mark. It may not necessarily be the right decision, and everyone's different. Someone may come with a new
Mhm,
idea that works. Someone may have an idea that doesn't work. So it varies. I think really.
definitely.
You may have someone who takes over at the top and who wants to do designs of cowboys and red Indians on dials. So, is that part good or bad or whatever? I don't know.
Might work on a small series.
But does it sort of fit in with the sort of DNA of the brand? I don't know. Whatever. Horses be horses, really.
Literally.
I didn't look at it like that, yeah.
There's a market for everything, I guess. Just a question of at what price and what location.
As long as they're mugs like me to buy it, that's fine.
Or like all of us,
Yeah.
I think. I think we're all like we're a captive audience. That's the trouble.
Yeah.
That's the trouble. One of the things I find really interesting, Ronnie, about your collection is a lot of your pieces are time only pieces, aren't they? Sort of three handers, a lot of them. And I find in my own sort of collecting journey, I'm starting to very much veer down a very similar path. What is it do you think about sort of simple watches that really draws your gaze as opposed to more complicated?
I think one can seize the expression of creativity far more in time only.
Mm.
I mean, the other point, from my personal point of view, I mean, I don't see the use of a chronograph unless you're sitting bored outside an African minister's office, or, or outside a doctor's surgery or something. What use is it? I mean, really, why would you spend all that money on something that's of no practical use? I mean, and then you have the tuberons and stuff. Okay, yes, I understand its feat in terms of horology and stuff like that, but for me personally, it doesn't speak to me at all. And it doesn't deserve me spending my hard-earned money on it. I think I've got a rather cynical and probably pragmatic view of these things.
I totally understand. Yeah, just the three-hander is such a constrained design problem. I mean, it's a simple thing, telling the time, but there are so many ways to do it, and that's the challenge. Is how do you take something simple and do it creatively? Are there particular favorites in your collection that you'd say are really the best examples of three-handers? I know you probably can't only pick one.
It's like choosing your best child, your favorite child. It's difficult, and I could narrow it down probably to a dozen or so. I mean, I love in terms of pedophilia, I love the Gilbert Belt ones. I think they're
Mhm.
lovely.
Mm.
There's some AP I've gathered along the way. Again, from again that design thing, which is what I love. There's some beautiful ones there. I like Cartier. I feel in their heyday, were in terms of design amazing. The designs
Mm,
they produced, for example, London under the independence they had in the 70s were absolutely gorgeous and stuff. So
absolutely.
yeah, I mean, within each brand, I think there's always something that was stunning. And
The Gilbert Albert pieces. There was four designs, weren't there? At least I can think of in the series. Is that correct?
well, this is it. So there were two that were produced as commercially, and then in terms of numbers, I think probably what 50 of each. We don't know.
Yes, yes.
There was another two that were, when they're described in auction catalog, they're written as prototypes and stuff, but there are probably 6 to 12 of each of those around. And then there was a
Mm.
fifth one, which came up for auction, I don't know, 15 years ago. That was a separate one. So there was actually five,
Hmm.
not four.
Oh, okay.
Wait.
And that when that came up, at that moment in time, I was too poor, so I couldn't get it. So that was that.
Well, let's hope it comes up on the market soon. It's soon for you.
Once you have something like that, you're not going to sell it till you're dead and buried. So, but
Well, you wait for your children who hopefully won't know the true value and just, dump it on the market.
coming to the end, don't worry. No one's getting.
But those Gilbert Albert pieces are incredible. I mean, I think he passed away. Was it last year or the year before?
It was last year, I believe. Yeah.
The last part of his career was sort of unfortunate with sort of terrible acquisitions and things. But I mean, his design language was incredible. I mean those particular pieces. I mean, they're like nothing else on the market anywhere. I mean, that was incredible.
I came across on Instagram in the last 1 week
Hmm.
a couple of watches that he actually designed and made himself. One, I was too quick, my Indian way haggling over the price, and someone went and bought it. And then the person who had it so I asked, "Do you have any others?" She said, "Oh yes, I do have another one." That one, I was like, "I'll take it," and I hope to have that soon. But I mean, if you look at that, I mean, I think he was allowed to exert his own, so he was allowed to sort of go full whack, and it's amazing. I hope to post it. So,
Absolutely.
Kind of one forward-looking question I want to ask is: you've evolved from collecting Patek to Audemars Piguet and Cartier and Vacheron, and then started picking up some more watches from some other brands. Where do you see your collection going next?
well, that shift. I mean, so basically, I started off with everything, sort of every man and his dog sort of brand kind of thing, and then narrowed in on Patek. And then I've found in the last 5 years, Patek, in terms of what I collect, it was increasingly getting difficult to find the watches that I'm looking for and in the right condition. And of course, the main thing was in terms of affordability. So that's where about 3 years ago I looked at Audemars Piguet because I just saw again from that same time period of 45 to 65 whatever, they had amazing watches in terms of design. So I looked at them, they were very affordable, and I focused on those in the last 3 years. And again, the sort of again it's now becoming, I'm not finding the watches available, and also the pricing is going up. Vacheron, I did some of their pieces are lovely. I've always had that grouse from the past, and in fact, some when I posted one, basically the story was I got one and gave it for service, and they messed up the dial, and it went 3 times, and I was so pissed.
Oh
Oh
my
wow.
goodness.
And this was 20 years ago, and someone said, well, "Why are you still posting it? Just grow, just get a sense of yourself, and why are you posting about them 20 years later?" But I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but it's still back of my mind. So I'm not really keen on collecting their watches unless it's in really, really good condition. And then in terms of the other brands, I mean, yeah, I've got a few. I mean, during this lockdown thing, I've bought a few Longines, some Zenith, some Universal. I think they're relatively affordable. They're fun and stuff. They're not going to break the bank and stuff, and they're lovely watches. I enjoy them and stuff. Would I get more of them? I mean, again, whenever I start doing this, I say, "Look, stop! I've got to focus on what I'm here to do," kind of thing. But as I said, there really is no end. I mean, you can just keep spending, and there's no end to it. It's really a tough thing to have restraint, I
Well,
think.
I think that's where somebody, like you, who's very, very thoughtful in the way they approach their collecting philosophy, I think is really the best way to trying to control this sort of addiction that we all share, having the connecting
Yeah.
thread running through a collection, whether it's design or in your case, or a particular time period or something that really speaks to you, I think really helps me sort of understand where you're coming from, sort of encapsulate your philosophy, which is, I think, really fantastic, really interesting.
For sure. And what's the outlook for collectors of time-only vintage hot horology watches today? Do you see any trends in the market?
Definitely. I mean, I see size reducing. It's come down from those 50 millimeter big drug dealer.
Alarm
Well,
clocks.
I won't use my other descriptors, which will offend people. But so you're getting back to sort of smaller watches, which are 40 millimeters and below. And I think that's one distinct trend. I think time only awareness that time only watches are nice. So I see that's the second kind of thing. And I mean, I see feedback to the posts I do, and people say, "Oh, you've opened our eyes and stuff." And I hope people have become more aware that things can be beautiful, even if they're simple. They can be beautiful. They don't have to have they don't need to look like the boiler room of the Titanic on your dial. It's fine. You know.
Agreed.
Very good. Well, I think that's a good note. That could be a caption for the episode. The boiler room. I think on that note, we might start to wrap up. One of the things we one of the things we do here on Fifth Wrist before we wrap up is sort of provide our listeners with something to broaden their horizons and our horizons. Usually it's an account on Instagram for them and for us to discover, or something to chase up and more knowledge to acquire. Adam, did you have anything
Sure.
for us
I'd
before?
recommend Bernoulli 70. He has many titanium watches and seems to really focus on titanium. And he also has a special watch, which he calls his Ulier, which is something that he built with Paul Gerber. He also has a Paul Gerber. And
Oh, I love
so
polygamy.
an interesting collector that is a really thoughtful person that is focused. Uli.
Oh, wow.
Fantastic. Wonderful. No, thank you for that. I didn't know that person. That's great. Thank you. What about you, Ronnie?
I've got a handful I've thought of. I've got first one is Josh Rankin. He's the guy who wrote the article on Genta and Audemars. So it's Josh Rankin. That's his personal account. He also sells watches, but where he does the
Yep.
articles and stuff. So I think
Brilliant.
he's great. There's another one called Books on Time.
Yes.
He's very good in terms of stuff. There's another one called 13 by Vu. Both of these sort of Cartier centric, but other watches as well. There's another one called Dr. Wanola. He actually goes into depth to write about the watches. He's not. I'm very lazy. I did it in the beginning, and I thought no one's even reading this. They're just liking or not liking, and I'm wasting my time. I ain't doing it. Um, so he actually goes into that effort, and it's actually very
What
informative
was
and
it,
stuff.
Doctor
And
Juanola.
Ahana? Yep. Yep. Lovely. Thank
Juanola.
you.
And then there's another gentleman called Uwe 1610. He's a big collector of vintage Audemars, and he has some lovely pieces.
Oh, wow.
And there are many others, I think, who really do communicate and go out of their way to educate. I learn a lot every day and stuff. The list is endless, but those are the ones I woke up this morning
That's
thinking of.
brilliant. Thank you very much for that. And a couple of them are new to me, so that's good. I look forward to things. And that's the thing I find, and that's why we include this sort of section is there's always somebody interesting. The world of enthusiasts is simultaneously very small and quite large in a sense. So I love discovering people like that.
I think you get to know who they are and stuff like that. It's strange. So for me, it's open. I don't have many friends, so suddenly I go to different countries and I'll meet people, and my daughter thinks I'm some whack job meeting strangers. But yeah, it's,
I think the same feel. All our relatives have the same feeling. I've never met a watch enthusiast whose relatives didn't think it was peculiar that they would just take off in the middle of whatever country they travel to. They're always arranging to meet some random person.
there's always.
That's right. I think that's
No, and most people are great fun. But sometimes what's terrible is when you go for these watch brand dog and pony shows, and you're like a boring Swiss meal over 7 courses, and you're sitting next to someone who's either a mute or has nothing to say. That is tough. And that I can't get anyone to come. My wife stopped coming. Anyone I say, "Will you come with me to that?" They said, "No,
You see,
you go on your own."
those are the only times where you need a chronograph. So at least you've got something to to play with. Or a perpetual calendar or something. You start resetting your dates.
Or just drink yourself silly and forget about it.
That also works. I think that approach is also
Yeah.
good.
But anyone who's from a watch brand, my humble request is please think who you invite to these events so that they have some like-mindedness and seat them next to each other and stuff. Please don't put try and mix different cultures. And I'm not, some like-mindedness would be nice, especially over a long, dull meal.
Or you're right. No, I think we've all been at a gathering seated next to a companion. We thought, I should have stayed at home. Lovely. No, good. Oh, well, let me do. I'll do my person to follow. The chap I've got is Tobias Birch. So Tobias, Tobias.Birch. Now Tobias is a liverman of the Worshipful Company of Clockmakers. He's a restorer and dealer in antique vintage English clocks and related sort of horological marvels. And he works on some incredible pieces, of sort of British horological history, John Arnold clocks, Frocham, Dent, really incredible pieces. And there's never a post from Tobias that I don't look at. If I need, thankful I live in Australia, I can't ship those things because they're they're often quite large. I think he's never posted about any clock that he's working on that I thought, I wish I had a place in my life for one of those. So he's an incredible horologist, lovely chap as well to interact with. But yeah, no, that's very, very cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, Ronnie. Can't thank you enough for joining us. I think it's been a fascinating conversation, both in terms of history, art movements, collecting, and just sort of, just the way to approach a thoughtful way to collect. So I think I can't thank you enough. It's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Yes, it's definitely one of the most thoughtful collections I've ever seen, and so I'm really grateful that we're able to spend this time with you today and hear your thoughts on it because there's just been so much thought that's gone into it. It's great to understand it a bit better.
It's been great fun. Thank you so much. Great. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. And the last thing we used to say is, Fifth Wrist, we were set up as a platform by enthusiasts and for enthusiasts. So for all our listeners, if you want to join us, contribute, write reviews, or even come on the podcast, please get in touch. Follow Fifth Wrist on Facebook and Instagram or on our website, fifthwrist.com. Like and subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. Follow me. I'm at Times Roman AU. My co-host Adam is at Medium Watch. And of course, our wonderful guest, Roni, is at Ronnie_M_29. Thank you for joining us today. And as we say every time, stay on time.